Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Roerig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. This is our 100th episode. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today, as we usually do with our anniversary episodes, we are going to be playing a round of Advocates of Great Entertainment. This time, we each picked a movie from the IMDb Top 100 list, and we are going to be discussing each other's picks. But before that, we have one other segment, which is On the Horizon. On the Horizon is where we look at what's coming up in the next couple of weeks or so, in the next week or so, actually. And the first one on our list is The Lincoln Lawyer. This is Season 2, Part 1 of The Lincoln Lawyer, because now they do seasons in parts. Will be dropping on Thursday, July 6th on Netflix. Then The Horror of Dolores Roach, which is kind of a Sweeney Todd-inspired movie based on a scripted podcast or movie or series, I'm not sure. Basically about a masseuse who accidentally kills somebody, and then somebody that she works with ends up cooking up the body to dispose of it to help her, and it just causes a whole Sweeney Todd-esque thing to start progressing from there.
Oh, damn, okay.
That is coming on Friday, July 7th to Amazon Prime. The Outlaws, this is that thing about meeting the in-laws, except they're actually thieves.
Oh, yeah, that
Watched
movie,
the trailer for. That movie is coming to Netflix on Friday, July 7th. Legend of Heroes Trails of Reverie is coming to PS4, PS5, PC, and Switch on Friday, July 7th. Joyride is coming to theaters on Friday, July 7th. This is the one, I don't know if you've seen trailers for this or not, but it's about an adopted Chinese girl and her friend who is like Chinese American, and they go to China to find the one girl's adopted parents, and it just becomes like a wacky road trip movie where they get framed for like drug possession and all sorts of other stuff going on, and they're just trying to kind of get through it alive, kind of comedy type thing.
That sounds cool.
On the same day, on Friday, July 7th, Insidious: The Red Door opens up in theaters, and latest in the Insidious series. And also Summer Gold, which is a coming-of-age movie about these kids sent to an off-grid summer camp. So, like, they can't use phones or anything like that. And they discover there's some kind of, like, secret Civil War gold hidden or something. And it's like a coming-of-age story about these kids in the summer camp. Like,
nice.
The kind of thing I would have loved when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It makes you think all those boring things that you have to do when you go on like a summer camp or something, like that there might actually be like secret treasure or something, and it's not just a boring ass camp. But that is coming on also on Friday, July 7th to theaters. That is our On the Horizon segment, and that leaves us with our final segment, our big segment of the day for our 100th episode of the podcast, Advocates of Great Entertainment.
Advocates of Great Entertainment.
I'm here to kill chaos, bitches!
So this week we picked from the IMDb Top 100 Movies list. This is like an aggregate score. We considered doing the AFI Top 100 list, but a lot of the entries in there are it's just like the entire top 20 is like movies from like before 1960. And it felt a little bit like, I don't know, like we need a little bit more variety there. It's not really, there's not a lot of variety in that list. It's all like classic Silver Age movies, you know?
It's like very boomer. It's like boomer centric, like to where like, oh man, yeah, they stopped making good movies at 1980. Like it's exactly like that, but yeah, it feels like that, you know?
The IMDb list got its own faults. There's some movies on that list in really high places that are kind of like, wow, recency bias much? Like I think like the Spider-Verse movie, the first one, is like number 3. It's like of all movies ever made. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It's a little bit of a weird placing for a movie like that, you know, but it's a great movie, but I don't know if I'd put it number 3 of all time or something. So yeah, so this list has its own issues too, but the one thing is we're not going through the whole list. We're each picking a movie from it. And I thought this one had a bit more variety of movies and it fit better for what we're trying to do. So that is what we're going to be doing now. And we're going to start things off with my pick, which was a movie that came out in 1952, number 99 on the list.
You're doing the AFI thing. Like, you just complained about AFI. Like, and then your pick is from the 50s.
Hey, I just wanted the variety in there to pick from, you know? I didn't want only movies from the 50s to be my option.
Exactly.
This came in at number 99 on the IMDb Top 100 list, and it is available on HBO Max for anybody who wants to check it out, and that is Ikiru, which is directed by Akira Kurosawa, written by Akira Kurosawa, Shinobu Hashimoto, and Hideo Oguni. This is a classic Kurosawa movie that has nothing to do with samurais. Usually Kurosawa movies, people think of samurais. This is not a samurai movie. It was contemporary for its time. It's 1952, but, you know, that's when it was made, and it takes place in that time. What's kind of interesting, I think, about that is that if you didn't think about it right off the top of your head, this is a Japanese movie, 1952. World War II ended in 45. So this is only 7 years after World War II. So this, when you watch the movie, you have to kind of understand that that's in there, that kind of feeling of a country that lost a war and kind of like what's permeating that country at this point only 7 years later and what that means. That plays a part of this movie and kind of the dynamics of the characters in it. So I'd seen this movie before, of course. It was my pick, but it's been like 20 years. I went through a phase where I was going through like all the Kurosawa movies, and now after watching this, I'm like, I kind of want to go and revisit some of them because there's some that I just don't really remember at all, and ones that I haven't watched maybe, and I need to kind of check those out. But Ikiru was my favorite when I was watching the Kurosawa movies. Have you ever seen Ikiru before?
No, I haven't watched it before this, Advocates.
So what did you think?
I thought it was a good movie. I thought it was like really interesting, really like a meditative, study on the value of life, what it means to actually live. Also like a very sharp social commentary on bureaucracy and just the uselessness of bureaucracy. Like, man, Kurosawa goes in hard on that. Like, yeah.
So cause I watched this with my mom when I was rewatching this for the podcast, and I said like, hey, I need to watch this for the podcast. Do you want to watch? And she said, sure. So she watched with me, and afterwards I was telling her, it's been like 20 years since I watched this movie, and the things that really the things I remember, like I want to point out like the 3 or 4 things that I very adamantly remember from this movie. One is that bureaucracy scene that you just mentioned, where it just keeps showing them.
Oh yeah,
we're
like,
buck.
yeah, like go to this department, go to this department, go talk to the deputy mayor, like mail us a form, like those poor people. Like, oh man.
It's to the point where like every time I'm ever talking to somebody and they bring up like, oh, this fucking bureaucracy or something, I'm like, have you seen Ikiru? Like every time somebody ever brings that up, it's like the first thing I respond with is, have you seen Ikiru? Because it's such like such a condemnation of bureaucracy and how useless it is. Besides that, the big things that I remember from this movie are the 2 times that he sings that song, and how the first time he sings it, it is with so much sadness and like the idea of just loss of what's coming for him, what's waiting for him. And the second time, when it's literally at the end of his life, it's sung with like a melancholy of nostalgia. It's like this, I did it. Like it's kind of like an I did it moment. Like I was able to accomplish something with my life. And those 2 moments, the juxtaposition of him singing in those 2 separate times are like, really cemented in my mind. And the vision of him on the swing in the snow is like an image that's just completely cemented in my mind when I think of this movie. And then besides that, there's like a really interesting structure to this movie. And what's super interesting about it is that the first half of the movie is about him trying to find purpose. And then it's like, oh, guess what? He died. And that's halfway through the movie. And then the rest of the movie is like, it's got some flashback scenes and stuff, but it's like, it's basically people at his memorial service.
It's actually like a little over, because like he dies at around like the 2-hour mark. He dies, and then, like, there's, like, an extra 20, like, almost 30 minutes with the bureaucrats and, like, the flashbacks.
But it's just an interesting structure because it's got such this long part where he's already dead, and it's basically just these people at his memorial service trying to figure out what the fuck he is. Like, how did he become like this, you know?
Yeah, they're trying to figure out, like, what changed in him that made him, like, so passionate to get that park built. And the mayor's, like, taking credit for, like, everything, you know.
He's saying this is the result of our bureaucracy, you know?
Our bureaucracy did this, you know, he was only part of it. But they're sitting around trying to figure out, and through, like, their discussions and, like, their memories of him at the time, they come to the realization that he knew he was sick because they initially assumed that he didn't even know he was sick since he never mentioned it to anybody.
Yeah, that's also like, stated when they bring up the theory, the possibility of that, and his son's like, no, he never told me. He would have told me.
Yeah, he would have told me.
Which is tragic because he tried, you know?
Yeah, he tried, but his son didn't want to listen to him. Instead, his son wanted to chastise him for mistaking him for having a relationship with this young woman who was like a subordinate of his at the bureaucracy, when really he was only hanging out with her because she seemed to be like full of life and full of love for living, and he wanted to find out from her. He wanted to lob onto that and like find out for her where that zeal came from.
Yeah.
It wasn't a romantic thing at all. But his son gets angry with him for that. And when he's trying to tell him that he has cancer, he's going to tell him, and then his son just like bursts out in like this huge rant about like him hanging around that woman, and that just ends that idea of like telling him anything. So it's really sad. But yeah, the bureaucrats, through their conversation, they come to the realization, and the real tragedy of the movie, the tragedy at the end, is the bureaucrats come to a realization about him that he knew he was dying, and that's what motivated him. And they make a vow, they make a decree amongst themselves that they are going to live life like he did in the end, and that they're not going to be useless bureaucrats going forward. And then the very next scene is in the bureaucracy, and they start passing the buck again. Somebody else comes up with an issue and they start passing the buck, and then one bureaucrat stands up, right? Because he remembers what they said. He stands up, and he stands there for a minute, and then he just sits back down.
Yeah,
and they just
they show everyone's faces, and you can just see there's like a little tinge of shame on their faces. Like they all know. It's not like they completely forgot what they talked about the night before. It's just that they lack the courage of their convictions, you know?
Right, and yeah. So they just go back to just being the same bureaucracy. Nothing ends up changing. And that's like the real tragedy. Like, despite everything, the system doesn't change.
In the same sense, there is like an air of hopefulness, because the guy that did stand up, it shows him the next scene after that. The last scene is them showing the park that's now being played in by children, this park that he was able to make. And the guy that stood up is walking by the park, and he's looking over it. And it seems like a seed has been planted in him. And maybe he's not ready for it yet, but it's kind of like that hopefulness of like, he understands. He, at least, of the group, knows that what he's doing is like the wrong path, and that he knows kind of what he should be doing. We don't know if he's going to ever do that or not, but it's like a little hopeful seed they plant at the very end.
Right, yeah.
That's what this movie is really about. It's about the idea of what your life means, and how do you find meaning in life, and how you just kind of get past the things that just push it around and come to a decision to just do it, to just get what needs to be done. And that's what ended up happening in Ikiru. And I love this movie. When I was rewatching it, I was like, it is a very old movie. It's 1952. That makes it, 71 years old now, I believe? Or 72 years old? No, 71 years old, yeah. Makes it 71 years old now. Very old movie. There's a lot of things that, like, it does, like, some faded transitions, and they're kind of, like, abrupt and kind of bad. It's just the technology of the time, of what was available to them, you know? And as I was, like, watching it again, I'm like, did I pick something a bit too old? Am I gonna, like, watch this and I'm gonna think, like, this isn't as good as I remember it, because it has been, like, 20 years and I'd only seen it once before. But as I started getting into the movie again, I'm like, no, this is what I loved about this movie. It starts coming, I think the real cementing point where I really start to like the movie, it happened the first time and it happened the second time, is when he first sings the song. The first time when he's in the restaurant, you know? And the way it kind of affects everybody and the way people feel like kind of uncomfortable around him when he's doing it, because everybody's kind of putting on this veil of like happiness and kind of escaping from their, you know, the monotony of their lives and everything else. And then he sings this song and it's like it just brings everybody to this moment of being uncomfortable with the truth of the moment, you know, the sadness that they all kind of have within them. And they're not willing to face that really. And you can just kind of see, it's not spoken of, you just see it on people's faces. And, yeah, so I really like the movie and I'm glad I went back to it. It confirmed for me that it is a good movie and that I wasn't just crazy 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was a very good movie. I'd never seen it before, but yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, it is, like you said, you called it depressing. I don't know, like, yeah, I guess I found it more melancholy than depressing, to be honest.
I mean, it's both. Like, there's parts that are just really depressing. There's parts that are really tragic and sad, and then there's parts that are hopeful, you know, and it's got like a lot of different things, but it's a very philosophical movie. It's very much like a movie that you think about, you know, a lot of people have commented, you know, over the years, like when it's been looked back upon by like film historians and critics and stuff, it's been looked at as like one of those kind of like life-changing movies, like the kind of movies that you watch and you go, am I leading my life right? You know, like, do I need to like think about how I'm leading my life and what I need to do in my life? And so it's interesting, like, after I watched the movie, like I had still some time left to kill in the evening and I'm like, I don't really want to watch anything else after I watched this. So I was watching like videos about this and like getting people, and there's one bit where there was somebody that was asking Patton Oswalt about it and he was talking about the experience of that movie and how much he loves the movie and how important it is to him and stuff. And the guy he was talking to hadn't seen the movie, and so he was like saying, oh, I envy you. You get to watch Ikiru for the first time, you know, and was like really kind of like thought that was like a really cool thing. And so, yeah, I did make down a couple of notes that I wanted to kind of address about it now that we've gotten through kind of our thoughts about it. So as I mentioned, this was made 7 years after World War II. That plays a part in it a bit. In one of the flashbacks you see, for example, his son is going off to war on a train. That's World War II that his son is going to be fighting in. This was remade as a TV movie in Japan in 2007, and again, just recently as a British film titled Living. So there's a movie called Living, came out in 2022. It stars the other Bill Nye, not the science guy, but the British actor, who was Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and he was the stepfather in Shaun of the Dead. That's Bill Nye, and he's in this movie. It's called Living, and it came out last year in 2022. I have not watched this remake. I've been wanting to. It's one of those ones I've been looking up. It is now available on something. I think it might be HBO Max as well. But I'm eager to actually sit down and watch this remake of it and see kind of how they address it. Apparently, the difference is that Ikiru took place in 1952, but it was contemporary for when it was made, because the movie came out in 1952. Whereas Living takes place kind of, I guess, around that same era in England, but it was made in 2022. So it's like, it's not contemporary.
It's kind of like when Charles Dickens novels get adapted. Those novels were contemporary when they were written.
And now they're period pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, besides that, it was going to be remade as a movie in the United States with Tom Hanks attached to star in the lead role, but it was never made. It never came to fruition. A musical adaptation was made in 2020, which, like, I really don't want to see.
That sounds stupid. That sounds like it ruined the entire thing.
There's one song that matters in this movie, and we already get it.
Yes.
We don't need a musical.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, So stupid. Everything needs to be a musical.
And the last thing is that this movie was actually inspired by it's interesting, Kurosawa's constantly, they inspired him like this multi-level international filmmaker, because a lot of his inspirations don't come from Japan. They come from other regions.
It was a Russian novel, right?
Yes, by Leo Tolstoy.
Tolstoy.
Yeah, from 1886. It's called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And he's often inspired by like Western media, like Kurosawa is. And then
that's not Western media.
Well, yeah, but non-Japanese, I should say.
Right, yeah.
And then he'll make like a film, and then that film becomes a big movie. And that film will become a basis for like Western movies, you know? So
Right,
this happens with Kurosawa a lot. Like he was heavily influenced by, I can't even think of his name right now. John something, the great Western director. I can't think of his name.
John, geez, yes.
John Ford, not Ford, no.
Ford, yeah,
It is John Ford, okay, yeah, John Ford.
Yeah.
He was heavily inspired by John Ford, and then that inspired him to make some of his samurai movies that he made kind of like those Western style movies. He would make a samurai movie like The Seven Samurai, which would then get adapted over here as like The Magnificent Seven. So that's happened a lot with his movies, where he's inspired by like Shakespeare, and then he makes a movie based on something from Shakespeare, and then that is copied in the West by somebody else, you know, who's copying the Kurosawa version of that, you know. A good example of that would be like Rashomon, not to mention the stuff that's based on it, but there are so many movies that they call them like Rashomon style movies. And that basically refers to anything where, you know, a story is told multiple times from different people's perspectives, and each time it's told, it's different because it's the biases of the people telling the story that come through. And so that's like become like a term in film, you know? And so this is kind of the way things are with Kurosawa. But yeah, Leo Tolstoy novel was the basis of the idea behind this that kind of kicked it off. Of course, it, you know, changes with time. And it's, like I said, had a lot of its own kind of adaptations. So I'm glad you were able to enjoy it. I was a little worried just because it is a very slow, old movie, very, you know, old-fashioned. There's some stuff that's like the audio is kind of a bit screechy at times. It's just because of the old tech of movies, you know?
Yeah.
So that is Ikiru, my favorite Akira Kurosawa movie, and my pick for advocates this week. Now we're going to move on to Will's pick. Tell us about your pick.
So my pick was the Shawshank Redemption. It's a movie starring Morgan Freeman and, oh Jesus, why can't I ever remember this guy's Tim Robbins.
Yes.
Who I haven't seen in anything in a long time, actually.
Yeah, it's been a while for Tim Robbins, yeah.
Yeah, he's
probably like semi-retired right now.
This film was made in 1994. It's based off a short story written by Stephen King. The film was directed by Frank Darabont, who was a big Stephen King fan. He also did The Mist, also based off a Stephen King short story.
Mm-hmm.
There was one
he
point
did the Green Mile, too.
He did the Green Mile. Yeah, that was also Frank Darabont. That's right.
And actually, like, one thing I put in the notes for later that I'll just bring up because it makes sense right here. Frank Darabont is a dollar baby, which is a thing that Stephen King started. You probably heard of this, just maybe not by that name. Or like they call them, you know, dollar movies or dollar deal. And basically Stephen King decided at some early point or midpoint in his career, like a long time ago, he decided that he was going to help out other aspiring artists. And one of the things he did for that was he would license a movie to like a film student or like, you know, an independent company that, you know, independent movie distributor to make one of his movies for only $1 to license the rights to it. And it's mostly film students that have done this. And Frank Darabont is one of those film students. He made an adaptation of Stephen King's novella, The Woman in the Room. And so technically he's made 4 Stephen King adaptations, one being a
I think there was also a point where he was attached to an adaptation of The Dark Tower, but that never happened.
Yeah. He's tight with Stephen King.
Yeah. Anyway, this isn't like a supernatural horror story like you're used to from Stephen King. This is another meditative story basically about living, you know.
Get busy living or get busy dying.
Yes, is Morgan Freeman's like famous line from the film. It's about Tim Robbins' character, Andy Dufresne,
I think it's Andy Dufresne.
Dufresne. Okay, thank you. It's Andy Dufresne, who is a banker who ends up being accused and convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. And, you know, like a crime of passion. He insists that he's innocent, but he's convicted. He's sent to Shawshank Prison, which is run by this really like sadistic evangelical
Bible-thumping, yeah.
Bible-thumping guy who's like, these are the rules of this penitentiary. First rule is, there's no taking the Lord's name in vain. I won't have that. And then he just says, the other rules you'll figure out as you go. So that immediately right there tells you what kind of guy this is. He's Warden Norton is the character's name. And he's followed by his second hand, the captain of the guards, Captain Hadley, played by Clancy Brown.
The Kurgan.
Again, Kurgan. Clancy Brown, I gotta say, is a absolutely fantastic character actor. He's great in everything he's in.
Yeah, he's one of those character actors that every time he pops up, I'm like, yes!
Yes! yeah.
He's in my favorite show of all time, Lost, too. So it's like...
yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's in Lost. He's great in that. He is very memorable in this film as the very, sadistic and just downright evil captain of the guards here.
Yeah, kind of a good representation of policing or prison guards for today's...
Right, yeah,
story,
very prescient to today's issues. This film is very ACAB. There is no painting the cops in any good light here. None of them are good guys.
The prison system, they're horrible. Yeah, they're not.
Yeah. And one of the earliest examples of this is at the beginning of the film after the prisoners are all brought in and put in their cells and the first night falls. All the inmates who have been there for a while are betting on who's the first newbie to break. And it's this big, heavy-set fellow who just breaks down, and Captain Hadley literally beats him to death. You see him knocked out, they take him to the infirmary, and then, the next scene is set the next morning, and you learn that he died from that beating.
Yeah, you find out because Haywood is all excited that he won the bet, and he's getting all the cigarettes, and he's Haywood being one of the prisoners in it, and so he's all like, haha, this is great, and he's like, I'm gonna give that fat ass, as he called him, a big kiss for helping me out or something, and Red's like, why don't you give him some of your cigarettes? And he's like, oh, and then he calls over to another one of the inmates and says, hey, you were working infirmary, how's he doing or something? And they're like, he's dead. And it just sours the whole mood. It's also the first time that Andy talks to anybody there, because he responds in a way that kind of pisses off Haywood by saying, what was his name? Yeah, and Haywood. Nobody knows his name, and that pisses off Haywood that, he brought that up. He's like, it doesn't matter, he's dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Haywood, one of the regular prisoners in kind of Andy and Red's gang there, by the way, played by William Sadler, Death from the second Bill and Ted movie.
Oh, yeah. And again, another fantastic character actor. Has a fantastic performance in this film. Haywood is a minor character, but he is ever present throughout the entirety of the film's run, and he has some great scenes himself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of smaller side characters in here which like really flesh out the story. There's this old man, Brooks.
Oh God, one of the most iconic scenes in movies, period, is the Brooks was here scene.
Yeah, it's the Brooks was here. Brooks is the prison librarian. He's taking care of like this bird he found in the yard. There's a scene in the middle of the movie like where Brooks has Hadley with like a shiv to the neck, you know, threatening to like stab him, or not Hadley, but you know, like
Haywood,
Haywood, threatening to stab him, and they're talking him down, and you find out it's because he is being released, and he doesn't know what to do about that because he's been there longer than anybody else.
The only one who I think kind of understands is Red. Like everyone's kind of confused about what that means.
Because I think this is set in like what, like the 50s?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, like it spans time, you know. Like I think it's
you can figure out the time periods based on who's on Andy's wall.
Yeah.
Because from Rita Hayworth to Marilyn Monroe to Raquel Welch, you know?
Yeah, I think it starts in the 40s and it ends in the 60s. And so, like, that scene is in the middle of the movie, so it's probably the 50s at that point. Again, time is rapidly moving in this movie. We're, like, jumping periods of time here. It's not, like, really strictly chronological in that this is, like, a day in the life. This is years happening within the span of a 2-hour period. So that scene is probably the 50s when that happens, and Brooks I believe they said, like, Brooks had been in there since the 20s. Mm-hmm. So he's been in there a long time. And that's the point. Like, he's been in there so long that that's his life. He doesn't know anything else anymore. And he's getting released, and he is terrified, because he doesn't know how to live in the outside world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's something, like you said, Red is the only person who understands that. It says he's institutionalized.
Yes,
he's an institutional man, you know?
Right, yeah, exactly.
He doesn't know how to live outside. Like Red uses a good example where he says, you start out hating the bars, then you get comfortable with them, and then you rely on them. And that's kind of like a big theme for Red's story in this movie, because the Brooks scene that's so famous is basically paired again. It's double, just like we talked about in Ikiru with the song being 2 times in the movie. Well, it's like we have basically Brooks scene twice in the movie, once with Brooks and once with Red. And again, it's like different the second time. And the second time he doesn't kill himself.
Red scene is like a subversion, yeah, because Brooks is out on parole. They take him, they put him in a halfway house. They get him a job at a supermarket, like just this low-level bagging job that they usually give a teenager to get. They give him that. He is not happy with this life at all.
He's constantly thinking about how to get back into prison. He's saying like he might kill his boss and rob and kill his boss just to get sent back to prison.
Right, yeah. And then he just ends up killing himself. That's his way out. And the same thing happens because at the end of the movie, after Andy escapes, which by the way is like
spoiler.
Yeah. This whole thing is spoilers. I don't feel like jumping around.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, after Andy escapes, Red finally gets his parole.
Yeah, and
it's funny because every time he's gone through the parole meetings, he's always been like trying to be on his best behavior and stuff. And then this one, he just like doesn't give a shit, and he just kind of tells them off. And then he gets paroled.
Well, the difference here is, like, he's honest. And, the previous hearings, he's clearly trying to, put on a good face and
tell them what they want to hear, yeah.
Tell them what they want to hear. And by this point, he's so done that he just unloads and he just tells the truth. And I guess that unvarnished honesty convinces them to release him. I don't know.
That's probably the most unrealistic part of the movie, because this was like 60s with a white parole board, It's like, no, they'd be like, you need to be humble and be in your place, boy, like that would be what it was actually like then.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I don't think they did a good job, convincing from the board side why they would approve that, but I mean, they do, so that's the story. And and he gets out and he gets sent to the exact same halfway house. He gets put in the exact same job.
Same room in the house.
Same room. This is obviously through their program. And he's going through the motions and he's going through the same thing Brooks did, because one of the last conversations Red has with Andy before Andy escapes is Andy's talking about going to Mexico and I think, opening this B&B or something with boats.
In Zihuatanejo.
In Zihuatanejo, and he tells Red about makes Red promise him that he will go to this tree
in Buxton, in a hayfield in Buxton,
where he first proposed to his late wife, and she agreed under that tree because he said he left something there, and he wants Red to promise to retrieve it. And Red, agrees, but, he's skeptical. It's yeah, but, you're never getting out of here. The reality is you're here. We're here. He agrees to that, but, he doesn't
Red's got this very, don't have hope kind of mentality when he's in prison.
Yes.
Hope will only hurt you kind of thing.
And the thing about, that last conversation is, during that last conversation with Andy's talking about, he's gonna get out and he's gonna hire Red, and Red's gonna help him with his business he's planning. And Red just says, I'm institutionalized. I've been here so long, I wouldn't know what to do in the outside world. I'm an institutionalized man now. And Andy tries to convince him otherwise. But so when you see Red out, he's going through, the same thoughts, the same mindset as Brooks. He has been institutionalized in his mind. He talks about, through narration, he talks about thinking of committing another crime and trying to get back into prison. And the only thing that stops him is the promise he made to Andy.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to that tree to fulfill that promise, and he finds a letter that Andy left him.
After he escaped, yeah.
After he had escaped, yes. Inviting him to join him where he is and live a new life. And
some money, too, that he gave him.
And some money that he gave him. But, this snaps Red out of it, and this gives Red a sense of purpose. So, for the first time, he feels like he can lead a real life.
So for the second time in his life, he commits a crime, parole violation.
Yeah, he commits a parole violation to go there, but he says, he's so old, they probably won't even bother.
They're not going to set up a roadblock, yeah.
yeah, they're not going to bother to go find him.
So yeah, he goes to Fort Hancock, Texas and crosses over the same way Andy did. Andy had sent Red a postcard from Fort Hancock, Texas, and I don't think there was anything written on it. It was just a blank card. And that was basically to say, like, hey, it's me, this is where I crossed. It's funny, after Andy escapes, like, he's like this legend in the prison now, and everybody's talking about him, but we should get into
Andy's,
what happens before that.
Andy's path through the film is interesting, because he comes in, he immediately strikes up a friendship with Red. At first, it's because Red's the guy who can get stuff. Like, Red says this in narration pretty early on, like, he's the man. And Andy needs something, and which is a stone pick, something like that. Like, it's just like this really small,
it's a rock hammer, I think.
A rock hammer, yeah. It's like this really small, like, cross between, like, a hammer and a pickaxe. At first, Red is very wary of this request because that could be a weapon, that could be used, something that could be used to escape. Andy assures Red that it's harmless and that he'll realize when he sees it. Reluctantly, Red agrees to get this for Andy. And from there, they strike up a friendship. It just kind of snowballs into a friendship from there.
It makes sense because Andy's the smartest guy in the prison, and Red's like the wisest guy in the prison as far as what it is to live in a prison. And so they're kind of like the top people of the prison as far as intelligence and wisdom go, you know? So it makes sense that they would hit it off with each other.
Yeah. Andy has a rough time of it, though, because he's got this group of thugs harassing him. The sisters, they're harassing him constantly, trying to rape him,
which they do multiple
beating
times.
him. Yes. It's never, like, made explicit, like, you don't see it, but, it happens. They remain like a big problem until like a point in the film where they get detail working outside, paving the roof, or putting tar on the roof. And, Andy overhears Hadley talk about like his brother and how his brother died and left him all this money, but how like it doesn't matter because of taxes and stuff. It's not as much money as people think it is because, he's gonna get screwed out of all the money from taxes and stuff. And he's overhearing Hadley, like, complaining about his situation, and he inserts himself to the horror of Red and everybody, the other inmates there. Like, Hadley, like, grabs him and threatens to throw him off the roof.
Yeah.
But he manages to convince Hadley that he can use tax law to make sure he keeps all of that money without paying a cent of tax on it. This leads to Andy doing the taxes for all the guards in the prison and eventually gets the attention of Warden Norton, who hires Andy on to do his finances as well.
Yeah, to launder money and do all sorts of
that
crimes.
Evolves into a relationship where Andy is helping Warden Norton launder money and, basically helping him conceal, like, these bribes that he's taking from various parties who, like, have an interest in, like, getting favors from him. He's been accepting bribes all this time, and he's helping the warden conceal these bribes.
Mm-hmm. The scene that you're thinking about with the sisters, where the abuses on Andy from the sisters, happens before he makes his deal with the warden, but it's because that deal's about to happen, I believe. It's not explicitly said, but it seems pretty obvious.
It's after he starts doing everybody's taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, remember, like, at first, he's just doing the warden's taxes. He hadn't been fully initiated into, like, all this business. So it's in the middle of, like, when he's developed this relationship with the guards and he's developing a relationship with the warden himself, that they're watching a movie with Rita Hayworth, obviously. And Andy, like, after talking to Red and asking Red to get him a poster, Rita Hayworth, he goes into the back room, I think the projection room. And that's where he is accosted by the sisters, and they got him.
Yeah, they beat him like an inch within his life.
Yeah, they beat
said
him.
He was in the infirmary for a month or something.
And that is and it was after that Captain Hadley pays the leader of the sisters,
Boggs Diamond.
Yes, a visit. Yeah, and beats him so badly. He doesn't kill him like he does the person, but he beats him so badly that he's no longer able to walk, and they say he's no longer able to even eat solid food.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird moment in the movie and it's portrayed correctly, because there's a sense of like, yeah, fuck that guy. But at the same time, like, the reason that's happening is because of the corruption of the guards that is so fucked up, and such a part of the movie too, as well.
Yes.
So it's like, you're like, fuck Boggs, he deserves everything he's getting, but it's also kind of a creepy moment of like, oh man, these guards are out of control, you know, at the same time.
Yeah. Captain Hadley only did it to protect Andy because Andy is useful to them. Mm-hmm. You know, not because he cares or like he's a good person. Like, no, he's a piece of shit. So yeah, it is like a weird part of the movie.
Let's talk about the escape.
Yeah, like,
because that's like a huge thing. That's like, that's what made this movie such a big deal, I think. I mean, there's lots of reasons it's a big deal, but I mean,
like, the clues are planted throughout Andy's entire story. It gets to a point in the film where Andy requests a piece of rope, and Red is concerned.
He thinks he's gonna kill himself, yeah.
Yeah, he thinks he's gonna be like Brooks. And there's this point, because it switches perspective, which is, again, this is a really cool narrative trick, because at that point, switches perspective from Andy to Red, and so it shows like, Red learns Andy has the rope, they show a shot after lights out, Andy pulls out the rope, he's holding it, and then it goes back to Red's perspective. Red, like, through narration says, you know, it shows Red in a cell, and through narration says, like, this was, like, the longest night of my life, because he's worried about what Andy's doing. And then it goes to next day, and it opens on next day with Red, and it shows the guards doing roll call, and Andy's not responding. And you see it, like, on Red's face, like horror, like, oh my god, like, he actually did it, you know, because he is not responding to the roll call. And it's this very tense scene. It's so well done. It's so tense, because we see the guard get there. He goes and he opens the cell door to Andy's cell, and it just shows the guard's face. And he just says, oh my god. And you're like, oh man, what? And it turns out, like, he's not dead in his cell. He's just not there at all.
Yeah.
And it's so
they go through the whole thing where, like, Red now recounts all these things that we've kind of seen throughout the movie, but with new context, to show how Andy escaped. And
yes, it was all littered throughout. It was like, okay, yeah, like, the rock pick. He actually did use that to dig a tunnel. Like, Red early on, like, says, like, it would take 600 years to dig yourself out with that. And it's funny because, like, Andy didn't intentionally intend for that to dig himself out. He's just using it to write his name on the wall. When a piece of it breaks off and he realizes how brittle that wall is. Yeah. And that's like when he realizes that he could use even something like that to dig himself out. And then that's when the other stuff comes into play. That's when, like, the poster Rita Hayworth comes in. That's why he requested the poster, not because he wants something nice to look at. And when
Red said it would take a couple of weeks, he was kind of, like, nervous. So that's because there's a chip in this wall. He needs to cover it up.
Right, yes, yeah, exactly. He needs to cover up the chip in the wall. The explanation is so detailed, too. I love it because the question you immediately get in your head is, okay, but what the hell had he been doing with the pieces of the wall? He's been sprinkling them on the yard. Like, yeah.
He's been bringing out handfuls at a time and dropping them out over 20 years.
Over 20 years. Yeah, so that's what he's been doing with the wall. And I think the rope was just to help guide his way.
Well, the rope was he tied it around his ankle. He had a bag because he had to crawl through. He had to crawl through this narrow hole, and he had to have a bag with like his change of clothes and everything like that he got.
That's right. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah,
which is the second super unrealistic thing about the movie is that Tim Robbins is like 6'4". That warden was like 5'4", but he goes out wearing like the warden's suit and looks like it fits like perfectly.
Yeah. You can excuse that. Like,
it's just kind of funny. Like, it's something that I don't think really even struck me until I was watching it this time, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. That short-ass warden has the same size suit? What? Like,
and it goes back, there's a point in the movie where, like, Red is questioning Andy about his money laundering for the warden and how that's going to leave a paper trail. That's going to come back to you. It's going to come back to the warden. How are you handling that? And Andy just tells them, like, he created a fictional person with, like, all the proper paperwork, even a social security number out in there, and that if
Randall Stevens is the name.
Randall Stevens, and he just explains all the paperwork's going to lead back to Randall, not to Andy and not to Warden Norton. He had it all figured out. This comes back into play.
He's a figment of Andy's imagination. He made him up, got him a birth certificate, a driver's license, like everything, was able to do it, pull all that off.
Yes. And this comes back because, like, after he gets out, he uses that identity to withdraw, like, I think they said, like, over 30,000 of the money.
Over
$370,000 of Warden Norton's money that he was helping him launder.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses that to take off and have a nice life. And also, like, he tips off the bank to what the warden was doing.
Well, because we didn't mention it, but there was a murder in addition to all this other stuff.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That was going on. And Andy details all of that and sends it to the press with evidence, including the record book of all the laundering.
Because there was this kid who comes into the prison for Tommy, who Andy mentors because he's trying to get his GED, and Andy takes it up on him just to teach him to pass. He does pass. But he also says he is a career petty criminal. He's been in and out of prison for most of his life. So he says he's been to many prisons, and he tells a story of this inmate that he knew.
Well, Red was telling him because he asked, what's Andy in prison for? And Red said murder. And Tommy's like, what? No way. There's no way. And Red starts telling Tommy the story of Andy's case.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it cuts back to Tommy, and he's just like crestfallen. He's like, oh my God. And then Red's like, what? And so Tommy tells him this whole story.
Yeah, he tells him the story of the inmate who actually did the crime. And Andy tells the warden doesn't want to help him out with that.
There's two things. One, if Andy's not in the prison, then he's no longer helping the warden launder his money and everything. That's the first thing. The second thing that Andy points out in I'm not going to do this way, but it pisses off the warden just to have it brought up, is that Andy's saying I'm not going to tell anybody about your scam, about the bribes and stuff. I won't tell anybody about it. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you I'm not going to say anything. And the mentioning of that infuriates the warden. But it's like a fury that comes from fear, because he knows that Andy's somebody who could bring him down if he was outside of the prison, because he knows everything. So it's like the warden cannot let Andy be outside of the prison. He can't let him leave. If he does, he feels like he'll be screwed, even if Andy promises he won't.
He has Tommy killed to prevent him from ever talking. But anyway, the point is, Andy tips them off to the warden, and the cops raid the prison, and they arrest Hadley, who Red says through monologue cried when he was arrested. And they're going to arrest Warden Norton, but Warden Norton is a coward, and he kills himself before they can get into his office.
Yeah, there's this Bible verse on his wall. It's like something about the Lord's will cometh. I can't remember exactly what it is, but he has this on his wall, and he's a huge hypocrite. And the safe with all of his crimes in it, like the lodger book of all the laundering for all the shit he's doing, is literally in a safe behind this Bible quote. And he looks at this right before he kills himself. He looks right at that sign again. And it's not a moment of I did the wrong thing. It's like a moment of I got caught doing the wrong thing.
He was a hypocrite. He never cared about doing the right thing.
Yeah.
He never cared about being a moral person. He only cared about enforcing other people to adhere to those values.
He's a bully. I mean, it's a lot of people in positions of authority are. It's kind of like, I've seen it, I've talked to people before where they say why are so many child molesters priests or teachers or something like that? It's not the occupation that makes you a child molester, it's access. It's if you're already somebody who thinks that way and you want access to children, you take a job that gives you authority and access to children. And it's the same thing what this movie is saying about prison guards. If you're a bully, if you're an abusive person, that's the kind of job that you would want, because it lets you exert your authority and abuse on prisoners and get away with it. And that's exactly what the warden is, It's also what Captain Hadley is.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, anything else to say about the Shawshank Redemption?
It's a fantastic movie. I 100% recommend it. I enjoyed it even more on the second watch than the original watch. great movie. I don't think I have any more to say on it, though.
Yeah, I already brought up, I'd taken notes about the whole, like, dollar baby and dollar deal thing with Stephen King, but we already mentioned that earlier in the discussion, so I don't have anything else to add beyond that. But yeah, Shawshank Redemption, an important American movie, and like you said, it's Stephen King not doing horror, but doing, like, you know, a drama with, I guess, horrific events in it, you could say, you know? But that's my favorite Stephen King, is this type of Stephen King. I wanted to mention a movie I was absolutely obsessed with when I was a young child was Stand By Me. I was so obsessed with that I literally, like, held a tape recorder up to the TV that was playing it and made myself a copy of the soundtrack by recording it off of the movie. And I would listen to the soundtrack because it made me think of the movie. So listening to, like, Lollipop, Roller Coaster, and all those, like, old songs that, you know, were from Stephen King's era, his childhood, you know, that he inserted himself into in these. This is my favorite kind of Stephen King story. It's the ones that aren't the horror ones that I end up liking the most, I think, of his works.
Right.
So that is The Shawshank Redemption. And we had talked previously about Ikiru. Again, if anybody wants to check out these movies, Shawshank Redemption is on Tubi, which is a ad-supported streaming service. It's completely free. You don't even need to subscribe. You can just go there and watch it, but you're going to have ads in it. You can also purchase it through, you know, Amazon or iTunes or whatever and watch it that way as well if you want to. And Ikiru is on HBO Max. You can stream it there, or you could buy it like Shawshank Redemption, same thing, but you can also just stream it off of HBO Max. Those are both readily available. I believe one of them, I think it's Shawshank Redemption, is actually going to be gone from Tubi soon, it said, but that probably means it's just going to be on some other streaming service. So it's usually what happens, you know. We'll hear about something going away, and then, like, a day after, we're like, oh god, you can't watch this anymore. And then the next day they're like, now it's on Peacock or something, you know. So it'll probably be available on something else soon. So you can check those out if you want to. Next week, we are going to be talking, I think, are we going to be talking about Secret Invasion? Have we decided that?
You know what? Let's decide that right now. Yes, the first 3 episodes, because I can't think of anything else to talk about, like, unless you have another subject.
No, that makes sense to me. Let's do the first 3 episodes of Secret Invasion. It's currently airing. 2 episodes have already aired. By the time I record the next episode, it'll be the same day that the 3rd episode comes out. So we will discuss those first 3 episodes next week of Marvel's Secret Invasion, which is on Disney Plus, of course, with all of the Marvel stuff. So thank you, everybody, for listening. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. If you go to our website and check any of the container stories for our podcast episodes, in the last paragraph, you will find all of the relevant links to our RSS feed for the podcast, our SoundCloud page, our main Facebook page, our Twitter accounts, which we've already mentioned. It's all there, so check that out. You can also subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast kind of choice, like Apple Podcast or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel, as well as other content, so you can check that out there as well. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Night.
Night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.
Koshi